Everybody, welcome back to the channel. HTM here over on the PTS server. I'm testing out update 35 this week. Lots of testing going on for this very different patch. One of the most controversial patches in the history of this game. I've been testing it out for several days now, and I want to give you a preview of what combat is going to look like in update 35. With a disclaimer that this is still PTS week 1, certainly a lot of things can change. Rest assured, I am giving feedback to developers. You can do that as well. I'll have a link down in the description to the PTS forums where you can do that. But that said, let's dive into some of these combat changes and let you know how things are going to look in update 35. So let's start by looking at some of the upcoming changes. Now, one of the main things that they've tried to do in update 35 is take in longer lasting abilities, so skills like buffs, healing over time effects, damage over time skills, and they've tried to increase the duration of those with the goal of being just to simplify rotation. So I can show you what I'm talking about here. For example, on the Nightblade back bar, typically you would run some dots. Well, now Razor Caltrops last 20 seconds. Twisting Path lasts 20 seconds plus 2-second buff from passives. A Dark Shade, very similar, 20 seconds plus 2 extra seconds from the passive. Barb Trap lasts 20 seconds, and Arrow Barrage lasts 20 seconds. So 20 seconds is sort of the new baseline for damage over time effects. Of course, there are some that are longer. Those skills that have a morph that's focused specifically on duration, for example, Endless Hail, the other morph of Volley, actually lasts 30 seconds. So some dots are up to 30 seconds in duration, which is pretty long. And this is actually what a lot of rotations will be turning into. You're going to load up your back bar with tons of these longer lasting dots. Like I said, 20 seconds is about the minimum now. Of course, you can have your buffs here as well. So you buff up, drop all your dots, swap to your front bar where you're still going to have a lot of direct damage. Your spammable attack, surprise attack if you're a Stamina Nightblade, maybe a heal, maybe an execute. So the skill bar and the rotation doesn't look a whole lot different. The main difference is your rotation is going to last longer. In other words, you don't need to bar swap as often. Typically, in Update 34, High Isle Chapter, rotation might be 10 seconds, 10 to 12 seconds, something like that, because the dot timers are shorter. Now, a lot of damage rotations will be at least 20 seconds. So imagine you will be spending a lot of time on your front bar. So I did try out this type of longer rotation just on my Nightblade Brawler build. On a couple of basic world bosses, this is usually how I test out a build anyways for like survivability, healing, and damage. You can see, just like I said, you're going to drop all those back bar dots, any buffs that you have, switch to your front bar, use your spammable DPS, and you can see since those dots, those back bar dots are so much longer in duration, I can spend a ton of time on the front bar just doing surprise attack, or like if you're a Templar, you'll be doing jabs, Sorcerer Crystal Weapon. So my first question to all of you watching this is, what do you think of this new longer rotation? And specifically, does this seem boring? Now, I will be honest with you guys and say when I first started testing this out on a target dummy, this seemed very boring to me. This did not feel like ESO combat at all. I mean, spending 10, 15 or more seconds on your front bar doing one spammable DPS skill. I mean, parsing to me is already boring, so this just made it feel worse. But I'll have to say as well, once I actually jumped into real combat and real content, it started to click and it actually felt a lot better. Most normal combat is not like a dummy parse. You can't sit there and spam your DPS skill 10 times in a row. You may need to do other things. You may need to move, you may need to heal, you may need to switch to an execute. And so I felt like in the context of actually playing something real, like a world boss or an arena or something like that it didn't feel too bad. But you can let me know from the footage that you're watching, how does this look? Does it still feel like ESO's fast-paced combat style? Let me know what you think in the comment section. So, dots are lasting longer in Update 35, so what's the big deal? Well, that's not the only thing that they changed. And even though dots are lasting longer, making for easier rotations, especially for newer players, damage is going down, and I mean way down. Now, they did increase the duration of these dots, but they did also lower the damage at the same time. Many classes are also seeing class-specific nerfs to things like major damaging abilities and passives that sees their DPS lowering even further. And then, of course, light and heavy attacks have seen the biggest nerf of all. These basic attacks no longer increase in effectiveness with your weapon and spell damage. Instead, they pretty much stick to a flat value, about 2,000 damage each. That can be increased by buffs like Empower and a few different item sets, champion point nodes. But overall, you're seeing a ton of reduction in damage from light and heavy attacks as well. I tested this out with one of my favorite recent build updates, that is the Infinity Magicka Sorcerer solo 1-bar setup. A lot of players like to play this particular build because of how simple it is. Just one skill bar on the Magicka Sorcerer with some dots and then heavy attacks being your main source of damage. Unfortunately, that did not work out well, at least in my testing so far of Update 35. Now, the developers did say that they wanted to still have heavy attack builds be possible in the game, but the nerf to heavy attack and light attack scaling, in combination with the nerf to damage over time damage, and even class-specific sources of damage like the Sorcerer Atronach Ultimate, means if these changes go through, then new players are going to struggle, I would say more than actually experienced players will. Dots and heavy attack builds are some of the most basic tools that new players use to progress in ESO to get to harder content, and these seem to have taken the biggest hit of all. Now, in my testing, I did run against the same world boss. This is the Sable Knight from the High Isle chapter. I did this both in my video, which I released for Update 34, and I did it just the other day on the PTS, and it took me a full 2 extra minutes to solo this world boss. That's about a 40% decrease in my overall damage. So yeah, that is a big difference. Now, I can understand the developers wanting to cut out some damage, particularly at the top end if players are completing content too quickly, but at least what I'm seeing so far is this is affecting average and lower action per minute players more than most. So I hope this is something that can be addressed. They can still raise up damage of dots, they can still do better scaling for heavy attacks, which, let's face it, nobody in endgame is abusing heavy attacks, especially not in PvE content like trials. This can still be reserved for new players, and it can still be effective if it's designed in that way. Other than that, I will just say that the damage reduction on dot skills hurts in a lot of other playstyles. I mean, it does make a difference. The dots are so weak currently in Update 35 that you need to stack like at least 5 to 6 dots to make any type of impact on your gameplay. But also, I think the fact that they changed the damage structure of dots, so now all of these only do damage every 2 seconds, not every 1 second. I think that's actually a bad idea. I don't think it fits in with all the different types of content in the game. Just a couple I can think of offhand: solo arenas like VMA, Vatashran. A lot of this content is designed around killing enemies very quickly and moving around a lot. If you place down a ground-based dot that's only ticking every 2 seconds, it's really not worth it anymore, except for maybe 1 or 2 of the major stationary boss fights. This is most likely true in a lot of dungeon encounters as well. Previously, when these used to tick every 1 second, there was a decent amount of risk-reward there. You could place it on the ground and it would do a decent amount of damage in about 10 seconds, where if the enemy moved out of your dot, that was okay, you could still recast it. And you'd still get good value for the resources you just spent. But now we're casting 20-second area effects on the ground. They're doing damage much slower, so if an enemy happens to move out in those 20 seconds, you've lost a lot of efficiency, and I would prefer that they still differentiate between ground-based dots and single target dots that stick to a target. I think for sticky dots like that, it's fine if those tick every 2 seconds. It's stuck on the target can move and it's still taking damage. But for ground-based dots, there's more risk involved. Those should tick faster. Those should tick at least every 1 second. So the better you time it to keep your enemies in your ground effects, the more rewarded you are. And then we haven't even discussed how this impacts PvP. I would say dot builds in PvP are gonna go away for the most part because dots are already doing so little damage in Update 35. You have to cut that damage in half for Battle Spirit, and it lasts too long. It's not impactful. There's no reason to use a dot now in a PvP build versus a burst ability. So those are just a couple of thoughts on Update 35. A bit of a preview for you guys so you can see what's currently happening with the patch. Now, I do want to emphasize this is week 1. I do expect they will walk back some of these nerfs. At least I hope they do. Because I think they have the right idea on some of this, like longer durations, for example, but they just need to tweak the numbers a little bit. Now, I will have more discussions on this in the next couple of days. We'll continue to keep you guys updated here on the channel as far as any future changes for the PTS, so make sure you're subscribed for that. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you around in the next video.